All right, welcome everyone. Good morning. My name is Gladys Godinez. I am a community organizer with the Center for Rural Affairs, and I will be moderating this conversation. I just wanted to introduce myself via video, and then I will share some slides with you just to do some housekeeping before we get started. Again, thank you for joining us. We're doing this conversation to be able to build those bridges that we need to build and be able to recognize that our communities in rural Nebraska and rural America have the Black presence, the Black beauty, and we want to be able to make sure that you get introduced to that, the Black world, and individuals that live here within our communities, and be able to hear their stories, understand them, and honestly meet individuals that are here and are part of our community. So I'm super excited to have Dr. Clark and Chris Cox here at the meeting. I just want you all to know that you are currently muted. This is such a great event. We have 100 plus individuals. We have 173 online right now via Zoom, and we have some more via Facebook Live. So just be aware that due to the awesomeness of the event itself, we have to limit it to chat, comments, or Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put those questions in the Q&A box and any comments in the chat box. And if you're joining us via Facebook Live, please put those questions and or comments via the comments section. We are here. We're so excited to have you. Again, welcome. My name is Gladys Godinez, Center for Rural Affairs, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share with you just some slides, and we'll get started. I know you're ready to listen to Dr. Clark and Christopher, so I'll get to them here soon. We would like to thank, once again, Dr. Beverly Clark III and Christopher Cox for joining us today. Our sponsors for this conversation are the YWCA out of Grand Island, the YWCA out of Adams County, ACLU of Nebraska, and the Center for Rural Affairs. So we thank everybody for sponsoring this conversation. The agenda, what this looks like for today, we'll be doing some housekeeping. We're going to talk about community rules. We'll do introductions. We'll have that conversation, the much needed conversation that we're the reason why we're all here. Q&A section, and we'll be sharing some resources with you all to make sure you go home with some resources. Again, housekeeping. The chat box is there for you. Please, if you can do us the favor of sharing your name and where you're joining us from. I know with the Zoom, we have a lot of rural Nebraska in attendance, and I got to give a shout out to Central Community College. You're showing up. You have registered and are joining in, so shout out to you. And then if you have any questions, please post those in the Q&A. We will be answering those questions towards the second half of this conversation, just so you're aware. And in the comment section on Facebook Live, please post where you're tuning in from. We would love to hear that. I know my partner in crime, Jordan Fireherm, and Sandra Renner are currently on Facebook Live, and they've shared that we have somebody from Uganda. So hey, we're coming international. So welcome everybody. We're super excited again to have you all here. And I do want to go back here real quick. I just want to give a shout out to Amplifier Art Foundation. They are the ones that have this art. It is free for printing and downloading. I will share that with the resources as well. All right, community rules. This conversation, as you all know, is an important one, and we want to make sure that everybody's aware of what we're trying to do, but we're trying to do it in a respectful and intentional manner. This conversation is for our communities to understand, right, the Black experience in rural Nebraska and rural America, but we also expect from our attendees some respect. So please understand we're respecting everyone in this conversation, including individuals in the comment sections. We're also bringing our best selves. So with good intention, I hope that your questions come with good intention as well. We assume positive intent. If there is a question that other people are, maybe frustrated at, it may be a legitimate question, and we may have to answer it, right? That's the whole point of being here today, is to be able to answer those questions, to be able to get through that. We want to develop dialogue and not block everybody out. step up and step back. We encourage full participation. Please be present. We want to recognize who's speaking and who is not. And then when we speak often, we need to step back also to listen to others. So if you, just so you're aware, we're all coming into this conversation from different levels, and we need to acknowledge that, right? We need to acknowledge some people haven't even met a Black person in their lives, and that's why they're here today. We also need to acknowledge that we have Black people in the room. So I am fully aware that we have different levels of this conversation going through. So please just understand that we need to recognize that we have questions, and hopefully we get to those answers, right? We have an hour and a half. So from 11 to 12:30, we will try to go through this. Just be aware that I've also had different conversations that this may need a part 2, part 3, part 4, right? So this is just initiating the conversation. And words have power. So again, with that intentionality, please, those questions, phrase them as best as you can. We will try to do our best to answer them. Any comments or questions that do have any kind of bad wording, we will not accept that. We will go ahead and delete those comments and chats in the chat box. So just be aware. We want you to understand that words do have power. So please watch your language as well. All right. I believe that's all I have in regards to housekeeping. So I'm going to get started. I want to welcome Dr. Beverly Clark. He is the Dean of Academic Education at Central Community College. He has worked in higher education for 17 years as an administrator, professor, and researcher. Beverly is an advocate for equality and has diligently worked to create and support diverse and inclusive educational environments. He is a resident of Grand Island and is active in the racial and social equality movement in the Grand Island and Hastings community. Before moving to Nebraska, Beverly was an associate professor of physics at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. In addition to teaching physics, Beverly performed research on the environmental impacts of microplastics. My husband and I looked at your bio, Dr. Clark, and we're like, we've got our own Iron Man in the room. That is awesome. And Beverly is a native of Java, Virginia, and has lived in Nebraska for just over 2 years. He attended college at Emory and Henry College, where he was a student athlete, lettering and football, and earned a BS degree in physics. Upon completing college, he taught English as a second language in Brazil for a year. After he attended graduate school in the Department of Physics at North Carolina State University. In 2003, Beverly earned a Master's of Science and completed a PhD in 2009. In 2018, he left Raleigh to assume the position of Dean of Instruction in the Academic Education Division at Central Community College, and in his spare time, he enjoys playing music, cooking, and gardening. All right, and then Christopher Cox, he is currently an 8th grade football coach and host of the Multiple Podcast Disorder. Chris has dedicated his career to coaching and mentoring diverse youth. He lives in Lexington, Nebraska. Christopher's career has encompassed being a programs director at the Orthman Community YMCA, a social worker for the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services, and a wraparound reach care coordinator at La Causa in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Chris is a native of New York City, having grown up and spent time in the boroughs of the Bronx and Brooklyn, attending high school at DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx. Graduating in the summer of 1999, Chris's athletic talents were noticed by coaches from Morningside College, who recruited him and started his life living in the Midwest. Arriving in Sioux City, Iowa, Chris began his career as a student athlete, studying mass communications and English literature, as well as becoming a founding member of the campus advocate group Crossed by Colors and captain of the football team. When Chris is not working, he enjoys watching movies, playing and watching football, writing short stories, poetry, and creating inspirational videos. So again, welcome Dr. Clark, welcome Chris. I am going to stop sharing the slide and we're going to start having a conversation just to talk about your experience, your living experience here in rural Nebraska. Now, both of you are from out of state, right? And one of the questions that I get, that I'm guessing you get, is how did you end up in rural Nebraska? So let's go ahead and start with Dr. Clark. Can you break it down to us to let us know how did you get here?
Thanks so much, Gladys, for inviting me to be part of this conversation. Um, uh, the short of it is a job opportunity brought us to Nebraska. I applied for a job at Central Community College and came out for an interview, was made an offer, and I accepted that position. And that's pretty much what brought me and my wife to Nebraska. We lived in Columbus for the first year, and my office was housed out of the Columbus campus. And we moved to Grand Island just over a year ago, and we've been here for a year. So that's basically what got me to Nebraska.
Awesome, thank you. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mine is really short. Football is what brought me to the Midwest. If it was not for that, I don't know if I would have first started out in Iowa and then moving to Nebraska. But being a student athlete, as you said in my bio, Morningside College coaches recruiting me and then going to play football at Morningside College and then deciding to stick around. So that's what has got me to the Midwest, and then my family that I've created and built as I've been out here. That's what led me to stay in the Midwest.
Thank you. Thank you for answering that. I know that's the first question, how did you get here? How did you, that's the first question that we get through our conversation. The other question that I want to ask is, what does the Black Lives Matter movement mean to you? We know that there's a history. It started approximately 6 years ago by 3 wonderful Black women, and we want to acknowledge that. But I know it means different to different people. And you're living in rural Nebraska. You're Black men. What does Black Lives Matter mean to you?
Do you want to take this?
You want me? I'll start, Chris. To me, the phrase Black Lives Matter is really a summation of this idea that we have to have equal concern for people of color as well as we do other individuals in our communities. So Black Lives Matter is trying to bring awareness to the issues of racial injustice, the issues of police brutality, and also policing that have greatly impacted the Black communities, has greatly affected, in some cases, the well-being, the social well-being of an entire group of people. So the Black Lives Matter movement, to me, is a movement to bring awareness to our country about these issues that are directly impacting people who look like me. And so far, we have not been able to develop reasonable strategies for resolving some of these issues that are directly related to racism and social injustice.
For me, I would say Black Lives Matters. Just that statement, that hashtag, to me, it's a verbal expression of frustration to me. Every time I hear it, every time I see it on social media, or whether it be scrawled in big letters in the streets in DC and St. Louis and other places, it's just a verbal expression, or a written expression, or sometimes verbal expression of all of our frustrations. As Dr. Clark, as you said, it's just literally begging, can we matter? Can we walk down the street and not be thought of as a threat? Can we walk into a store and someone not wonder where we came from, or I've never seen that person before, or even have to calculate, should they be afraid of me? And that's what it makes me, that's what I feel when I hear it. It's just us saying, can we fight together to not have those feelings? Can Black Lives Matter, so that way we can go out in the street and feel safe? We can have interactions with police and not literally be afraid for our lives if it's just a traffic stop, or, you know, or ticket, or some menial transgression that for anyone else is just an in and out in a conversation. And for us, we're thinking of all the possibilities of what may happen. Like, what if I die? What if I get arrested? Who do I call? Who's watching? So that's what Black Lives Matter means to me.
And Gladys, if I can add to that,
Sure.
you know, I just want to share the fact that, you know, the statement Black Lives Matter, that movement does not imply that other lives don't matter. So Black Lives Matter doesn't imply that white lives matter, or Asian lives matter, or Latino lives matter. It's not. I think if you ask people from the Black community, what they will tell you is we graciously acknowledge the fact that every individual life has equal impact, has equal significance. The problem is we don't feel like that same sentiment has been reciprocated by a number of people in the community. So the statement Black Lives Matter is not a statement against others. It's a statement to bring awareness to the fact that currently Black people in this country do not feel as if the treatment is equal. And we see this exacerbated in our judicial system. We see it exacerbated in how people of color are policed, especially in low-income neighborhoods. So, you know, I want people to leave this discussion realizing that you can support Black Lives Matter without there being some implication that you have an indifference to other people in our community.
Thank you for adding that, because my follow-up was going to be, what do you mean? Why don't all lives matter, right? That's the response that we get when we say Black Lives Matter. We get, why don't all lives matter then? But and we've seen those images, right? One house is burning, one house is not. Yet the house that is burning wants, you know, help, and everybody's looking at the other house, and somebody at that house is saying, well, why are you helping my house? That's the difference. We're looking at individuals that are currently hurting and saying, hey, look at us, feel us, understand us, and we want to matter too, you know, just as much as everybody. And at this moment, it's not happening. I thank you both for explaining that to us. And we understand, you know, that we are getting that counter conversation a lot, that all lives matter. That we're not saying, and you are not saying that all lives don't matter, but we are saying, please be aware that Black lives are not equally and justified at this moment and being treated equally. Thank you. So one of the questions that is happening in regards to the Black Lives Matter movement is the rallies, right? And the marches and the powerful movements that are currently happening throughout the nation. But we're also seeing rioting and looting. Now, individuals are going to ask, or we're asking the question, right? Is that okay? Is rioting and looting okay in your point of view?
I'll go ahead and jump on this one first. So that's a loaded question, right? And as I perceive, every question that we're going to get is going to be loaded. For me personally, I'm going to say this for me. So my words speak for me. I am not going to be hit with the, oh, look over there, they broke a building in the store, because they broke a window in the store. Because usually that's what happens. That's how the media portrays it. There's a peaceful protest. The police are meeting those peaceful protests with violence and with actions of violence, which then leads to an already frustrated group of people who are completely emotional at that time to now act fully based on emotion. And again, it's an expression of what they're feeling. If there's nowhere else for this to go, it's going to go outwards. It's going to explode. And that goes into breaking a car window, breaking something they see on the street. Is it right? I wish it didn't happen. No, I I wish we didn't have to express ourselves in that way. I wish we weren't pushed in that direction to express ourselves. But what I will say is I don't feel that that should take away from the narrative of why we were there in the first place. And I think the destruction of property gets used as a quick and easy cop-out. It's a quick card to say, oh, well, I was going to believe in this movement, but because you broke a couple store windows, you're criminals again, so I can't be on the same page with you. And it's just an easy cop-out, so they don't have to then explain to their friends or family why they are siding with these protests and these movements for Black Lives Matter. And it's just, like I said, it's just a cop-out. Things are going to happen. Looting is going to happen. And looting, what I mean is looting, again, is incorrect and is illegal, but is a way for African Americans who have been oppressed, who have been in low-income neighborhoods. This is the only way that their expression is going to come out. Now, do we like it? No. Is it illegal? Yes. But we can't continue to focus on that and then use that as an excuse to say, see, that's all you people want to do is loot. That's all you want to do is break into a store. That's all you want to do is get some Jordans. When if you simply look, especially with this situation, most of those property destructions were set off by people who were not involved in the protest or the Black Lives Matter movements. But again, people fail to see that because they use it as a get out of the conversation free card. I won't say get out of jail, but it's a get out of the conversation free card. Oh, nope, they're breaking stuff. I'm out of here. Can't deal with it. You guys are breaking the law again. That's all Black people do is break the law. So I can't believe in Black Lives Matter, or I can't stand behind your protest. Regardless of the fact that they just saw a man get his neck kneeled on in this situation for over 9 minutes. And it becomes very frustrating. Or you see a woman who gets taken in for a traffic stop, mysteriously die in jail. Or you see a young man get shot in his car, legally reaching for his permit to show that he was allowed to have his weapon. You know, so these things are currently happening, and we need you people to look at this, not you people, but we need people to look at what's happening versus saying, oh, they destroyed a Target. I really don't care about that Target. Personally, I don't care about the Target. I don't care about that store that got broken at. I care that we are going to start seriously addressing the conversation that systemic racism happens or is continually happening. Racism has not gone away. And then we want our lives to matter outside of the box that you allow it to matter. So outside of entertainment, outside of athletics, outside of those things that you're okay with us mattering in, we want our life to matter 100% of the time. I hope I answered the question. I tried my best to wrap it up.
Thank you, Chris. Dr. Clark?
Yeah, I also, Chris has made some excellent points. I also think it's important to note that we have to consider the context upon which these events have occurred. If we look at the framework behind some of the systemic experiences that people of color have faced, it has created an environment in which their concerns have fallen on deaf ears. We're in an environment where, as Chris has referenced, we're watching people who look like us being murdered. Many of these individuals are not armed. You can't tell me that a cell phone is perceived as a weapon. We're dealing with these kinds of issues, and everyone wants to look at the results. And we don't want to focus on the underlying problems that have created this environment in which people feel like they have to riot or loot. I don't think any of us feel as if rioting and looting is right, or the destruction of personal property is something that is acceptable. And it's something that I wouldn't do. But I do think that it's important for people to consider this idea that all of us have some breaking point. Even if we look at this issue removed from racial injustice, and we look at this from a personal level. I mean, look at a relationship. What do people do in relationships when they are continuously ignored, when they're never heard, when their opinions are always disregarded, when they're put in a situation where you can clearly and blatantly see mistreatment and unfairness? What does that do to an individual? It creates an atmosphere where you realize that you have to do something extreme. You have to do something that's over the top to gain people's attention. Chris said it perfectly. There are some of us in our communities that don't have the ability to use their voices. They don't have a platform for a voice. I'm fortunate that I can participate in a panel discussion like this, and I don't have to express myself in negative ways, but we have to start to look at this with compassionate eyes. No one feels like the issue is right, but we have to have compassion in understanding the context upon which all of this has developed in our country. We can look at this from a short-term standpoint, and if we look at what has occurred over the past, say, 5 or 6 years. I had similar discussions 4 years ago when we were talking about Philando Castile. We were talking about Eric Garner. We were talking about Sandra Bland. Exact same situations. And yet here we are again. So think about being ignored. Think about being marginalized. Think about that for just a 4-year period. And imagine how upset and angry you'd be. And then you can look at this over a longer period, and you think about as a people, institutionalized components being put into place that have perpetuated these ideas that really exacerbate racial insensitivity, exacerbate these issues that are related to public housing. All of these things have culminated into this anger and this frustration. And I think that if people in our communities refuse to listen to what's being said, this is the response that you're going to get, whether it's right or wrong. And I think that we have to be more attentive to the concerns of people who don't look like us and be willing to listen and learn.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. And I see the comments, in regards to what's happening and in the webinar chat. I'm not seeing the Facebook Live comments, so I apologize for that. But I do see that one of the comments says most riots are started by young, mostly white men after sporting events, but media never talks about race in those cases. And we can really go in different layers in regards to riots and looting. We can even go into history, right? And how change happens and how this needs to happen for change to actually transpire.
Well, you know what, Gladys? In that case, it's called a celebration.
Right.
And I wrote down something that you had on your first slide. Words have power. Mm-hmm. And if we use words like celebration when we see this occurring after a sporting event, then it makes us feel totally fine about the barn burning or mm-hmm. dragging, stuff out into the middle of the street and setting it on fire. You see this after all of these big national championship games. But when we describe individuals who have been marginalized doing this, now we call this violent. We call this, barbaric. We use different descriptors, and those words do carry a lot of power and they resonate.
It's the context in which we are placed. They want to see these young, mostly the assumption is middle-class white men and women who are out there supporting their favorite team, which has probably has a higher rate of African-American players on that team. So they're supporting what these African-Americans are doing because they're good in that sense that they won a championship. But the same people that look like those athletes are now characterized as, like you said, animalistic, barbaric, from low-income neighborhoods. They are hyper-violent. and they are destroying a situation versus rather than celebrating a situation. And it's the context in which we are placed in. And African Americans and people of color are always placed in the hyper-violent context. Like whenever we're associated with something, we're hyper-violent or we're bigger, stronger than someone else. So therefore we should be feared. But yet that same context translated into sports, we're all fine. They want us. They want the bigger, faster African-American person of color from these very same low-income neighborhoods that they wouldn't enter in to stop and buy a soda, but they'll enter in there to go shopping for a player that can win them the next championship to then lead into the next riot or the next burning down or overall celebration of their sport. But outside of that, with street clothes on, you would be afraid of these players. You'd be afraid of these NBA players or these NFL players. You wouldn't want to be around them because you would, again, see them in the context of hyper-violent. And that's how, like you said, descriptors, that's how we're constantly being described. And that frustration comes from us saying, why are you looking at us like this? And then you have a whole bunch of people saying, oh, but I don't see color. It's not a problem. And it's like, no, it is a very big problem. And it's a very big delineation between how young white Americans are described and young African-American and people of color are described. And like you said, it has a very profound power into how all of our actions are seen.
Thank you both for going through that with us. And then just to add to it, because this is also part of this looting rioting conversation, is the monuments and Confederate flag. So now we're seeing Confederate monuments being torn down. Historically, historical statues that have a lot of history in regards to just racism and slavery that are being taken down. We're also seeing it with our Native American neighbors and family members, that they're also going through with Columbus and the monuments, the Mount Rushmore monuments. So what are your thoughts in regards to these monuments being torn down, one, and then it's, again, a loaded question because I also want to ask about the Confederate flag and the significance of it and why it's necessary for us to no longer fly it with pride here in the United States. So I'll go ahead and pass it along to Dr. Clark.
So two parts of it. I guess the first part is dealing with the monuments. I think if you ask different people, you're going to get varying opinions on how we should approach this. What I will say is, I feel that while this is occurring, this is not the most immediate issue that we need to focus on in our communities. I hope, and what I hope to do is to continue to bring awareness to the fact that we have to change laws, we have to change policies and practices in our communities that create the situation that allows for systemic racism, that allows for police brutality and this biased policing that occurs based off of the color of skin. A monument has never assaulted me. A monument has never shot a person dead in the street after a traffic stop. I do feel as if there is importance to addressing some of these issues, but I think that there are more important discussions that need to be had right now, and they must be focused on changing the legislation. About 15, 20 years ago, and my timeline may be off a little, we changed how we police in our country. We transitioned from being a community-based policing to militarized policing. That has had a significant impact on people of color and also low-income neighborhoods. Those types of laws that allow an individual to shoot a Black man in the street and claim self-defense, those laws must be addressed and they must be changed. To me, that is the most important issue that we can take up right now. Coming out of the rural South, growing up in a Confederate stronghold, the easiest way to describe what the Confederate flag represents, and mind you, I just want to add, the Confederate flag that they used, that was not the final flag that was used to represent the Confederate South. So this idea that it relates to a heritage, that's just a false narrative because that information is inaccurate. But it's the equivalent of, you know, the swastika being flown with pride in Germany. It's not allowed. This idea that you have to fly a flag in order to represent your heritage, it's asinine. And I feel as if we are basically allowing something to occur because it does not directly impact a large group of individuals. If you look at the percentage of Black people in this country in comparison to whites, we're outnumbered. We are indeed a minority. The problem, I think, is when we allow these symbols to be used in negative ways. We absolutely know it has a negative connotation. There's no rationale that can say, oh, well, that's not how it looks. Oh, that's not how I think about the Confederate flag. None of those things can be used as reasonable arguments because we see what's happening. We see the representation, whether right or wrong. We see the individuals flying this as a badge of honor when related to racial insensitivity, racism, racial biases. So we've got to transition our conversations and be more actionable. And that means changing legislation, going out and voting in our best interests and not voting against our interests, and making sure that we actually take some concern in issues that affect people who don't look like us.
I thank you for your statement because it was so impactful just hearing you and hearing you listen, especially you being from Virginia. So more so than anybody understanding what that flag really means and how it's used. For me, I would say my small disagreement, I agree, I'm okay with the monuments coming down because it is waking people up to the understanding that history has been redacted, that there is a large portion of history that as a whole, the people that live on this earth don't know. And it's because it's been written, quote unquote, by the winners. And yes, the North won the war, but it was still white people who won the war. So things are going to be written with a softer touch. And the fact that these monuments that were built not in the early 1900s or late 1890s, no, these monuments were built in the 50s. They were built specifically to enforce the narrative that African Americans were inferior and were not wanted, and that race mixing or attempting to strive for better economical and educational standards would not be tolerated in the South. And this is what we need to understand. This is the start of what you said, Dr. Clark, the start of changing these laws. It's actually getting people to understand why some of these monuments that are around us even exist. Because if they don't understand that this history is false or why these statues were put in place, then how are they going to understand why they need to rewrite these laws? And so that's why I'm like, these need to come down because they are just placeholders for racism, for someone to say, well, we're going to name a school after Robert E. Lee. Did no one look at his history and have seen what he's done in his lifetime? And again, the students who now go to these schools are predominantly African American. And they will prop these African American students right up front because of their prowess in academics, their prowess in athletics. But yet their school is a complete, a misnomer. You know, the fact that they're going to Robert E. Lee. And we get criticized, or this movement to take down these monuments is being criticized, saying that, oh, you won't know your history if we take these down. You don't know your history now. You don't know the true history now behind the monuments and behind why we're fighting to have them taken down right now. Like it was mentioned about, like Gladys mentioned about our Native American men and women and fighting, Columbus Day and those issues. Do people really understand that Columbus wasn't the first one that found America, quote unquote? Or why they're called, or why Native Americans were initially called Indians is because he thought he was in India, because he was for his whole reason for traveling was for the spice trade. So if we don't understand these things and we keep subscribing to the lies or the easy textbook information that they give us, then we will be continuing to go down the path and repeat this series of negative and marginalized understanding of history. And so I want these to come down, because I want the conversation to be, why was it put up in the first place? Why was it allowed to go up if this country is the greatest country in the world and everyone can be equal? Then why was a monument built to a person that didn't think we were better than cattle? Why was that built, and why was it allowed to stand? And my feelings go the same way with the Confederate flag. It is a known depiction of hate. I'm sorry. I'm not here for the Dukes of Hazzard argument and that it's okay because it's on TV and it's I'm not here for that. It is a known depiction of hate. If you throw that up, it is you proclaiming your superiority to anyone that is not of your color. And those in the South have been fighting to get from under the thumb of that flag for generations. And to sit there and say that, oh, this is my heritage, like you said, the cleanest word I can say is asinine. I can't understand how we can sit back and say, oh, this is my heritage. It's not your heritage. Like you said, that's not even the final form of that flag. It is just a way to hide your hate behind your quote unquote patriotism. That's what I'll say.
You're exactly right, Chris. And I think it's important for us to discuss the fact that in this country, Black people are expected to be okay with it. Like Blacks are expected to just accept the version of history that has been presented to us in history books, and we're supposed to be fine with it. There's this misconception that because Chris wants to tear those monuments down, that he's not patriotic or he doesn't love this country as much as someone else. And again, it is an absolutely false narrative that gets portrayed about Black people. I can be passionate about this country, I can be supportive about this country, and I can do it in a way that makes sure that history gets told from a fair and accurate standpoint. I think about Thomas Jefferson and how, his life was sensationalized, and he had, children that he bore from a Black slave. He raped that slave. He was a rapist. And that aspect of history is not discussed. We like to soften the discussion and we say, oh, well, he had children with. That wasn't consensual. And if you look at it in every definition of how we define rape in our country, that's absolutely what it was. They were continuously sexually assaulted. And I feel as if many Americans have figured out ways to disassociate themselves from these conversations. Oh, well, it doesn't matter to me. Oh, well, that's not really how I see history. Oh, well, that's your history. That's not my history. And people have to understand there is no Black history and white history. It's all American history. Some of that, just like our family, there are good parts of it. There are bad parts. There are parts we are ashamed of. There are parts that we should learn from and grow. And, I think the reason why we are where we are right now, if you think about what happened in the civil rights movement, if you think about our transition away from Jim Crow politics, and sadly to see that we're back at a place now where Jim Crow politics has been used and is being used continuously to dig into the racial divide of our country. If you look at why we're there, it's because we have not had discussions about the shameful components of our history and figured out ways to learn and take aspects of that and apply it so that we can be better as a country. We have to realize that every individual has the same weight, has the same importance. And simply because I'm a Black man doesn't mean that I should just take whatever is available to me and be happy because I'm in this country. That's not how this country was founded. And if we are really true patriots, if we are really, really engaged and we want to talk about patriotism, patriotism should be applied to every American citizen, regardless of skin color, regardless of socioeconomic background, regardless of any of those factors that we use to basically add descriptors to individuals in this country.
I appreciate both of you expressing how, it's not, you're not really giving me or giving us a different answer, but you do have different perspectives in regards to the monument piece. So I appreciate that. I want to just remind everyone that the Q&A section will be around 12 o'clock. We do have some scripted questions that we're asking at this moment, and then just reminding you to put those questions in the Q&A box, and you can vote up those questions, so we'll make sure to ask those. Sorry, I just had to do a little commercial here. And then I also, in my commercial, there has been this conversation. Chris, you say African American. Dr. Clark, you say Black. Can we figure that out? Can you clear that up for us? We're trying to be politically correct, right? We're trying to understand how to better communicate and speak to Black people, African American people. How do we acknowledge it correctly? Do we say African American? Do we say Black? Can you give me some thoughts, Dr. Clark?
In my mind, and I think this is probably a perfect example, both Black and African American are, I think, appropriate terms. I'll tell you why I use the term Black American. The reason is because so many things that are associated with Blackness are associated with being wrong. And in my mind, and I'm not saying that this is how others believe it, but African American, oh, that feels so much softer. That's not as intrusive as Black. And I am unapologetically Black. I don't have a problem with people realizing that I'm a Black man. And I don't feel like I have to soften my Blackness for people to be comfortable. If people call me a Black man, that's fine. If people call me an African American man, that's fine. I think it really, for me, is an identity thing. At least as far as I can tell, the last 3 or 4 generations of my people were from this country, from the United States. I respect and will use the term African American quite frequently. It just really depends. But for me, I feel like it's important during this time for people to understand what Blackness is. It is not wrong for me to describe myself or to embrace the fact that I am a Black American. It does not negate my my solidarity or my allegiance to this country. It's just a simple fact. And I think that the word Black shouldn't be seen as being as abrasive, but it is. And people don't like to associate with things that are, labeled as Black.
I use both.
Clark, Chris. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I
use both. I don't think it's an issue to use one or the other. For me, like if I say African American or say Black, or you hear me use people of color, because I'm refusing to say minority, because our Native American friends, our Asian friends, our brown friends, we are all in this discussion because we are all some shade of Black and we are all some shade other than white. And we need to make sure we're all included in this discussion as well. I don't have a problem with it because I'll say Black, I'll say African American. I think the issue comes with who is using what term and in what context. So if you're saying the blacks or those black guys, then that becomes, wait a minute, you need to check how you're talking to me or about me. And if you're trying to use it as, oh, you know, those African Americans in hushed tones as well, then that becomes an issue too. So I think for everyone who is involved in this conversation now, be it either Facebook or directly in the Zoom, I think it goes into the context of how and when you're using the terms, because you can tell yourself, oh, but I said African American. But if you said it in a particular context or you said it in a particular way that is demeaning or is as if you're afraid to say it, then that becomes an issue. Or if you're saying black as the only descriptor for someone, oh yeah, I got stopped by this black cop. Why did you need to say that? Why couldn't he just be a cop? You know, or, you know, there was those black guys over there at the restaurant. And it's like, why couldn't they just be guys in the restaurant? Like, why does it need to be black? So I think the real issue is how you choose to describe them, when you choose to describe them, context in it. But as for African Americans, as for Black people, as for people of color, I think we can use either one interchangeably. I don't think that's an issue for us. Again, I think the issue is when people decide to use it or how.
Thank you. That's a, you know, I just wanted to ask that question. I heard it while we were talking, and I just wanted to clarify. Again, we have so many layers of understanding through our attendees. So I just wanted to make sure that we start at the very basic at the very least. So I appreciate your answers on that. I do want to go back, Dr. Clark, in regards to the legislation and law enforcement and the relationship between law enforcement and Black people. And before we could say more Black men, right? But we're also seeing Black women dying now under law enforcement. Can you, Chris, I'll start with you. Can you tell us what your thoughts are on law enforcement? I even want to ask your personal experience in rural Nebraska. Have you been pulled over? Have you, you know, those experiences that as a Black man, have you experienced? I know it's a loaded question again, but I think, again, all of these are. So, yeah. Chris, can you talk to us a little bit about your experience?
I'm going to say I am like 100% afraid of the police. And that's even the police in the small town, because I look at it as, even though I know a great many of the police officers and the sheriffs in this town, you know, you still never know that one moment you get pulled over and you don't know where that officer's coming from that day, or you move kind of funny, or you don't know how they view you. You know, because I'm a larger Black guy, you know, played football, I've lifted weights, and I've had people who are friends like, oh, when I first saw you, I was very intimidated by you. Like, you're very intimidating. So I don't know how that officer will view me in that moment, even though I've had positive interactions with them before. That doesn't mean this interaction is going to be positive. And from my experience, I've had police officers pull guns on me, and I had not known if I was going to make it out of that situation. So in the bio, I'm originally from New York City. And one of the biggest, when I was growing up, cases of police officers killing an unarmed Black man was Amadou Diallo. And they shot him 45 times for having his wallet in his hand in front of his own building. And if you haven't heard about that, please go read that. That was one of the very first things that, not that I didn't know about race relations with Black people and cops in New York City, but that was one of the first things where my parents were constantly having conversations with me about when I go outside. And a situation of me going to work, and I had to work in the middle of the morning, so like 2, 3 in the morning. I got stopped at a train station. 2 cop cars came out, so 4 police officers drew guns, and I had a Metro card in my hand, which allows you to get onto the train. And I was so afraid that they were going to mistake that for some type of weapon, and I was going to die right there and there on the steps of that train station. Had it not been for in a third police car that the person who, it was a robbery situation, had that person who had got robbed was in the third police car, I would have probably been taken in, arrested, beaten, or whatever, but they said I wasn't the guy. So that's part of my indoctrination to police. And that was at 17 years old. I can run back even further than that in terms of being pulled off of trains in New York, arrested, asked what gang I belonged to, asked where I did time upstate. This is at a 16-year-old. Telling the officer, no, I play football, that's why I'm big. Yeah, no, stop lying to me. Where'd you done time at upstate? And having them call in and have to give my social security number and everything and have them run a check on me to allow me to get back on the train to go back to school. So, and that's just a couple of excerpts from my life as a teenager. We're not even talking about when I was like 10, 11, and 12 before we got up to there. So, and in rural Nebraska, I've had cops pull me over. I used to have tinted windows. And it's funny because like a lot of my friends who are white, they have tinted windows. They've never had a problem. And they always say, oh, the cops, they know my car. But I've had tinted windows and I lived in Kearney, and I'm pretty sure people knew my car. It was very, it wasn't like there's a whole bunch of them running around. I got pulled over all the time in the same spot, driving from my house to go to work at YWCA, going past UNK. I got pulled over all the time. Not speeding, not even playing loud music, just in a car with tinted windows, driving past UNK, getting pulled over. Getting pulled over in my own apartment building in Kearney and asked where I was going. You know, and like, I live here. Well, are you sure? What building do you live at? Where do you live at? Having to have a memorization of, this is the apartment I lived at. There's my ID that shows my apartment lived at. Having to prove your legal existence becomes exhausting. And that's what it is like being an African American, being a Black man, being a person of color. You are constantly having to prove your right to exist in a specific space at a specific time. And under the fear that if someone feels that you shouldn't be there, they may have to write to end your life altogether because they felt you shouldn't be in a space that they were not comfortable with you being in. Now, in my small town where I currently live at, I haven't had any issues with police. I don't necessarily foresee me having issues with police, but I am still afraid of the police because of my history with the police, because of my, and I will say this, and I think all African Americans or most have PTSD. Just because of race relations in this country, systemic racism, and how we are being policed. I truly feel that way. So when police are around, I'm like, okay, hands on the wheel, you know, don't nobody move, don't say nothing, speak in your most eloquent tone of voice so they don't feel that you're being aggressive towards them, because that's all we need is someone to feel that I'm being aggressive, and at my size, they're going to use all types of force to subdue me. So that's where I stand with police, again, because I am afraid of them. I am afraid of police and how they're going to react and when they're going to see me. And because they might catch me on the day that I'm just exhausted of trying to explain myself that I'm supposed to be living in this small town, or I'm supposed to be in this small area, or I'm supposed to be driving this car that I'm driving, and they catch me on an off day and I say something flippant. And then who knows what's going to happen after that. So I think that's, in mine, is not just a microcosm. I think there's a lot, like, most African Americans and most Black people feel this way about police, because that is how we are treated. That is how we are targeted. And when we say policing, that is what we mean. Like, they're not coming around and saying, oh, hey, Chris, how's it going today? How was the football game? That's not how we're treated. You are treated as a criminal, as a potential thug, as a potential drug dealer, gangbanger, whatever, before they even get to know you. And that's when people hear us talking about policing, that's what we mean when they stop and say, where you going? Not how you doing, not, hey, what's going on? It's a nice day outside. No, hey, where you going? Do you know somebody around here? Are you supposed to be here? Again, us having to prove our existence.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Chris. And there's a trauma that comes along with experiencing these things, watching others who look like you experience these things. Speaking to rural Nebraska and other, areas of the country that are rural, I know that we can sometimes make the assumption that we think that everything is okay in our communities and we don't have issues with racism. But I think it really comes down to an idea of racial bias. And depending on, a police officer's experience with a Black man, it's going to dictate how they feel about me or how they feel about Chris when they walk up to the car. When someone approaches me, their assumption is never, oh my God, he's the most intelligent person in the room. Oh my gosh, maybe I'm pulling over this, dean, and I'm going to have a conversation with him about. That's not how I'm seen when I interact. I'm seen as this big Black individual who is going to be, a threat. And I guess the question becomes, what makes you see me as being more threatening than being more intellectual? The sad part about it is we as Black Americans have, we knew things were really getting worse when you saw Black women being assaulted and Black women being killed. At least at one point in our country, there was a general respect for women. But now there isn't even a distinction between Black men and Black women. We've been taught, my mother taught me things to do to make yourself seem less intimidating.
Yes.
This is going to sound ridiculous, but even in Nebraska, oftentimes I'm a hip hop person. I come from a hip hop generation. I have earrings, I have tattoos, I wear hip hop clothes, but I don't do that a lot of times when I'm moving through the community because I don't feel as if I can express myself in a way that doesn't lead them to believe I'm a thug or I'm a drug dealer. Or, the assumption is that you're some, athlete or you're some rapper. But the assumption is never that you are a coach or you're a physicist. And it's unfair, but we've learned to do things like, I won't ever put specialized rims on my car. Like, I won't ever put 10 on my car that hasn't been done at a dealership and is probably under whatever the acceptable limit is. I mean, I don't commonly wear hats in the car. And you're like, some of this doesn't even make sense. I agree. It absolutely doesn't make sense. But these are the types of things that you do to minimize your intimidation factor. It's sad that, again, African Americans, people of color, and this includes the Latinx community, because we have a huge flourishing Latinx community here in Nebraska. We're expected to be okay with this type of policing. So why, you'll hear people say, well, why don't, it wouldn't have went that way if they would have just listened to what the police officer said, or if they hadn't argued with the police officer. So basically what you're saying is, when I have an interaction with the police, there should be an asterisk by that interaction, because I am not allowed to engage police officers in the same way as a white person would. I'm not allowed to make a reasonable argument about the fact that, you stopped me for something that wasn't legal. We're not allowed to express ourselves. We're not allowed to use the constitutional rights that are ours. They're absolutely ours. We're not allowed to use them in those types of situations. And it goes back to us addressing racial biases. We've got to figure out ways, and you've heard people talk about defunding the police. I just don't think we've used the most accurate description of what needs to occur. There needs to be a reallocation of funds that is focused on community policing and engaging and discussing some of these challenges that come up because of racial biases. Because you feel like, you know, darker skinned people, and I mean, we've seen this, darker Black individuals are perceived as being more aggressive or worse than lighter skinned people. I mean, all of this is ridiculous, but it's not fabricated. And for white Americans to provide a response that all this information is being fabricated, none of these things are really happening. You know, it's not a large scale systemic problem with racism. You know, policing hasn't changed how we're dealing with crime. Like, all of those are just absolutely inaccurate. And it is having an impact on the younger children, younger Black kids that are growing up. When I was younger, I lived in a smaller community very similar to rural Nebraska, and we knew the police officers. They were our family. They were friends. We went to church together. They lived in the communities. That policing paradigm has completely changed. And we have shifted to something where I am being categorized as soon as people see how I look. As soon as someone sees Chris's size, he's put into this category, this heightened category. My thing is, why, when they see Chris, they don't think, oh my God, man, this guy's gonna be really smart. I better be on my P's and Q's. That's not the first assumption. And I think until we get to a point in our country where when you see me, you make intellectual assumptions as opposed to these assumptions about my physical aggressiveness, then we have not properly dealt with racial biases that are framing and shaping how we see others.
Gladys, I'd like to add one thing in terms of police. I think we also have to make the point of understanding how the police force has been trained historically, like, and to take into context how, especially in Los Angeles, and I'm going to say Gates, the first one, the police chief, they specifically called for police officers from the South. They had a mass hiring of police officers from the South to deal with the mass migration of African Americans to LA or to Los Angeles, because they know how to deal with Black people. And that's how they trained their police force for years, on that same type of mentality. And then other police forces followed that. The same thing with police forces on the East Coast and in New York City. They became their own gang. Like in New York City, the cops that worked the night shift when I was growing up, so like in mid 80s or early 80s to the 90s, they had badges and they had sayings that said, "We own the night." And they would come out there and really, you know, they were out there to bust heads. They wanted to be more intimidating than any quote unquote criminal element could be. That's how police forces have been trained for so long. And some of these very same officers are now police chiefs, are sergeants, are captains. So this has permeated through generations. So again, this is not, like Dr. Clark said, this is not something we are making up. The police force was designed specifically to treat African Americans, Black people, people of color a certain way, to demoralize, to dehumanize, and to take any thought or notion of fighting for rights out of their head.
Yeah, that's right. It's the aspect of superiority. And, you know, and we acknowledge the fact that there are police officers who risk their lives every day, and they do it with honor, they do it with integrity, yes. They do it with compassion and empathy. And again, one of the false narratives that has been shared about Black people is we are anti-police and we don't like police in general. We like to be safe just like any other person. And I think that to say that we cannot address like the systemic problems that have been scaffolded around the policing process in our country, to say we can't address those simply because, you know, asking those questions or raising attention to that means that you hate the police is a false narrative that is constantly being shared by people in our country. Some of that's being perpetuated by politicians. Some of that's being perpetuated by the media. But in my mind, I feel like we have the ability to do both. We have the ability to appreciate individuals who are safely and respectfully policing our neighborhoods. And we have the ability to hold the people accountable for their lack of professionalism, their lack of concern for life. And last thing, and I'll let this one go, back to what we were talking about, Chris, how policing was changed. If you've noticed, how the interaction is ending up with far many more people being killed because we transitioned to teaching police to shoot center mass, and now they're emptying clips into people. They're not being shot once or twice. Maybe there's a possibility that there's some chance of survival. They're being shot center mass. They're emptying clips, 17, 18 shots into people. The guy in Georgia was drunk, fell asleep at the drive-through at the Wendy's. How does that end with him being shot? It should have ended with him being in a drunk tank. It could have ended in a number of different ways. And someone said, oh, well, he grabbed for the police officer's taser. So that means that that person should have been killed. Because you commit a crime, because you do something wrong, should not give police officers the right to use deadly force. It does not play out this way in a lot of interactions when there are white people that are being pulled over or being engaged by police. So we just have to get to this point in our country where we can acknowledge the fact that racial biases are creating situations in which Black people are being disproportionately impacted. And I know in areas like Grand Island and in Columbus, the Latinx community, they are being impacted in the same ways.
Thank you both for sharing your experiences in regards to law enforcement and clarifying that, right? We're not anti-police. We want for police to not treat us like criminals just by the way that we look. And I appreciate you adding the Latino and Latinas in the room. And just a quick comment. I know it's 12:14. I do have one question that is also my question for moderating, but also a question that has a lot of votes in this chat. But I want to acknowledge the chat or the webinar chat here, how all of you have been adding your experiences, how all of you have shared with us the knowledge that you personally have. Charmaine, Kimara, Precious, thank you for adding comments. We are all learning through this, so I appreciate all of you also being part of the conversation, so thank you. One of the questions that I know for sure everybody wants an answer, or at the very least a thought process, is how, the question is from Christine. It says, let me double check, I'm sorry. I apologize. It's Dr. Logan out of Hastings College. She's asking, what do you want from white allies in Nebraska and how can we help? Dr. Clark?
What I would like, I've got a list actually. Educate yourselves. We have to understand that many Black Americans have learned to live and interact in diverse social backgrounds. I've interacted with white Americans. I've interacted with Latinx individuals. I've been putting it in situations all of my life in which I've had to learn how to interact with others. And we have to get to a point where that interaction goes both ways. Like, ask yourself, what do you know about Black contributions to American culture? Engage in uncomfortable conversations. Many Americans clearly see others being mistreated or treated wrongly, but say and do nothing. Like, you cannot continue to see these things occur and not take some kind of action. You have to be actionable. And this is important because actions speak louder than words. You can say to me, I support you, I feel like Black lives do matter, but if your actions indicate otherwise, and that's actions through how you vote, that's actions through how you impact your community. If they're different than the words that you're saying, then there are contradictions that you have to resolve within yourself. vote for humanity and not a political affiliation. There are laws that are antiquated, and they're written to provide advantages to some Americans and not others. We've got to understand that these laws are not right, and we have to take an active attempt in changing those. We must learn our history accurately. We have to stop romanticizing historical events that are favorable to white Americans. We've got to embrace the idea that other individuals like indigenous peoples, Blacks, Latinx people have equally contributed to the success of our society. Those are just a few things that I think white Americans can do to get engaged, to actively involve yourself in this struggle, because there is no sideline. There is no Switzerland. You can't be neutral when it comes to racism. And it's not a political issue. There is no I am for racism or against racism. Racism is absolutely wrong. And if you have any other opinion of that, that's not related to your political affiliation. That's related to your lack of intelligence.
Chris?
I didn't have a list, so I failed the pop quiz.
I thought about that one a lot, Chris.
I think the biggest thing that white America can do is to not be dismissive. Because you don't understand fully where my pain or where my emotion comes from, you can't dismiss it as, oh, that's an overreaction, or dismiss it in terms of, well, is that really happening? And again, so it's looking at that dismissive language. Are Black people really dying more than, like, you're questioning my pain. You're questioning our emotional status at that point in time. Like, what do you mean, is it really happening? There's video evidence. So please don't ask me, is it really happening? Or please don't, or please don't ask me to explain myself for the entire culture of Black people. Like, if we are having a conversation, then I would like that conversation between you and I, because I can't speak for every Black person. Contrary to belief, I don't know every Black person, so I can't speak for them. And I think the next thing, so along with not being dismissive of it, I think the next thing is to not question my patriotism because of it. And like Dr. Clark said, not to make it political, but more so, well, if you are for Colin Kaepernick kneeling, then you're against the flag. No, not at all. You know, I need you to have more conversation with me instead of making blanket statements at me to fight what I believe in. And I guess that could be part of dismissive too, because it seems like every time we protest something in America, especially Black people, every time we protest or say this isn't right, then we're told, well, if you don't like it here, go back to where you came from. Or if you're not an American, or then you get the post of America and you're not going to change us. And it's like, okay, but how can we change what's happening to people of color in this nation? How can we do that when you're still okay with these blanket statements, these blanket memes, or these blanket reactions to our pain? And lastly, I would say, if you're going to help or you want to, or things that you can do to be involved just to be involved. Like, you have to educate yourself and understand white savior versus I'm here to help. Like, you're not going to make things turn around just because you're a white man or woman and now you want to get involved in the Black Lives Matter turnaround. Like, you have to understand, you're not the linchpin that's going to put us over the top to victory. You, especially if you're just getting into this, you're a spectator. You need to learn, educate yourself, and be as helpful and open as you possibly can be. And then understand with that openness and with that helpfulness, you may lose some of your lifelong dear friends. You're going to have to understand, if you want to stand on the side of right, I'm against racism, I'm against systemic racism, I'm against the mistreatment of people of different races and backgrounds and religions and sexual orientations. That means you can't just support that in private. You can't just tell me personally you support me. You need to shut down your friends on social media that make rude and distasteful comments, that share jokes about former President Barack Obama and his wife, that share jokes about shooting or running over protesters. You have to shut that down as well, because then that becomes lip service. Like Dr. Clark says, that becomes lip service. Oh yeah, I support you, good job. But then your friend on social media is like, you know, oh, hey, look at these two monkeys in office, and you're like laughing at the meme. That doesn't make sense. And we need you guys to shut that down, because the more of you who come out and say, no, I'm not going to accept that behavior because that is truly wrong, or no, they are not any less patriotic because that is an untruthful statement because this and this and this, then we'll actually start coming together more and then the word divisive will start to dissipate, because you can't be an ally in the closet, but then in real life, you're letting all these things go by without as much as a side eye to what's happening. That's what we need from white America. If you're really going to be an ally, you're going to have to shut down your friend that you went to high school with, who is spouting some racist ideology on Facebook, but you don't want to do it because that's been your friend and you know him. He's not a bad guy. He may not be, but he's saying something that's bad and he's saying something that's hurtful, and that needs to stop. That needs to be addressed. So that's where we need your help at, because when we do it, we're argumentative and we're just fighting.
You're the angry black guy when you do it.
Yeah, you're the angry black guy. You're argumentative. My mental health goes crazy because I'm trying to fight everybody on Facebook. And you're like, you know, we used to be friends. How come you can't understand this? But you guys have to help us and shut down those untruths, those racist ideologies that are going around with your friends, even in your family. You're going to have to address that conversation and say, no, that's wrong, because of my conversations with X, Y, and Z, and because of my own personal education. We can't give you a syllabus. Well, Dr. Clark, you probably could give out a syllabus, but we can't give you a syllabus in terms of what books to study. Here's your report. I need it in APA style. We can't do that. You need to start venturing out on your own to educate yourselves as to what this country has done to African Americans, to Black people, to people of color over the years, and what they are continuing to do it, how racism has mutated so as to be less detectable right now.
You know what? And just to add to that really quickly, you know, we as a country are very resilient. When we collectively put our minds to things, we solve those problems. So the fact that we have not come up with a solution to racial injustice just tells me that as a collective, we have not deemed it a priority. We have not moved it to a point in our list of priorities in which we will make it an actionable issue to solve. Because when we do, we'll create solutions. We've done it time and time again. This is not the most complex issue we've faced as a nation. We solve problems. We just haven't, we have not wanted to solve this problem.
Yes.
And I think furthering those discussions, having these conversations, will start moving this country in the direction that we need to go in order to really solve this problem.
Thank you. Thank you both. I know that there are more questions in the Q&A, and I know there's more questions in the Facebook chat. I almost want to put you on the spotlight and say, hey, can we have a part 2? But I feel like I'll ask you in private and we'll schedule that here in the future. I think it is much needed conversation that we need to have. And, you know, we're not going to get through it in 1 hour and a half. We're not going to get through it in an 8-hour seminar. And like Chris said, there's no syllabus here. But we did want to, the Center for Rural Affairs did want to be able to put this conversation together to, at the very least, get to know some very wonderful, powerful, smart, and leaders, Black leaders in our communities. And we hope that this conversation has given you some light and to their experiences, their lived experiences in rural Nebraska. Now, we're not done. I still have some resources, but I just wanted to thank you. Well, I have you here on video, both of you, for having this time, trusting me and the Center for Rural Affairs and our sponsors in having this very needed conversation. So I appreciate you both for being here with us. And any last thoughts, any last comments before I go into the closing?
I just want to say thanks so much. I appreciate it. I enjoyed dialoguing with you, Chris, Gladys. Yeah. Absolute honor to be part of this. I want to say thank you to all the participants, everyone who decided to participate either through Zoom or Facebook Live. If you're here and you're listening, then you are a part of the solution. Please continue these discussions, the things that you've heard today. Take them home, start dialogue in your families, start dialogue with friends. Let's figure out ways to positively continue these discussions.
I would add, again, thank you for allowing the platform and this tool as an education tool. I mean, one of the, if you can say a positive thing that's come out of social distancing and COVID-19 and stay-at-home measures, it's the fact that a lot of people are learning this technology and understanding we can still actually be connected through technology versus the disconnect we face in social media. So I would like thank you for this and being able to connect our voice with over 200 and some odd other people that live within Nebraska or other states. Dr. Clark, Beverly, thank you. I really appreciated like hearing your words, talking to you, and having you be a part of this as well. I would say is to everyone who's listening, if you're gonna take this home, is to not be afraid or to work through that fear. Because I think there's gonna be a fear at some point, but you're gonna have to work through that fear in terms of when you have this conversation with your loved one, with your family, with your friends, to be able to understand that if you're going to speak to them with some of the education you got from here today or education you do on your own, you are going to face backlash. And you are going to face people that completely don't agree with you, and their interactions with you may change. And you have to be able to fight through that, because fighting through that will lead us all to a quicker change within this country. So I would, whatever education you're gonna do, books you need to read, just conversations with your friends that are of color, that are just real, true conversations, even though they're gonna be really, really uncomfortable to begin with, fight through that fear and keep forging ahead, because that's going to help us all. Thank you.
And you know, we keep getting people, they're ready for number 2, so we're gonna have to schedule that
yes,
here in the near future.
Just let us know.
Tomorrow.
Will.
Do it. Tomorrow. Let's do it all week.
Let me get organized first. Let me get my stuff together first. I need to figure a couple things out. But thank you again. I'm going to just hit some slides for you all to just give you some more information and go ahead and close. So resources, right now Jordan and Sandra both have been sharing through the chat and or through the comments section resources from the YWCA of Grand Island, ACLU of Nebraska, and then Black Lives Matters page. We want you to be aware that there are resources out there, again, not a set curriculum, and all of those resources will tell you that as well, so just be aware. We are sharing a resource kit that is called Anti-Racism Resource Toolkit. So I just wanted to make sure that you are aware of that. Anti-racism is currently I'm going to say a word that is being utilized a lot. So I just wanted to define that real quick. And I had it in my notes, so I can't find that at this moment. But if I were to round it up, anti-racism is just fighting racism. So it's no longer okay to just say you're not racist. It's constantly fighting against racism. So that's an anti-racism kit with a lot of resources and books. So please look into those resources. We will be sharing the recording via YouTube, these resources, and I'm also going to share a report from ACLU of Nebraska on policing, both with Black and Brown and Indigenous communities. So just be aware we'll be sharing that as well. And then lastly, you know, we talked in the comment section and in the chat, both of you, all of you touched it, our history, right? In rural Nebraska, you're going to say, what, there's Black people in rural Nebraska in the 1800s? Ding, ding, ding. There were Black settlers in rural Nebraska in the 1800s. Here you see a picture for the African American church near Brownlee, Nebraska. And I don't know if you know where that's at because I didn't, so I had to Google it. It is in Cherry County, Nebraska, and this is the DeWitty Homesteaders. So our support, our ask, if you're wanting to donate, please keep history alive. Keep history alive through the Great Plains Black History Museum. That's where we would refer you to donate to keep that history going. It started in 1970. It has struggled to stay alive and it has reinitiated just recently. So look them up, Great Plains Black History Museum. They're preserving, celebrating, and educating Black history in here, the state of Nebraska. So to that, here is our contact information for myself and Jordan Fireherm, who is my partner in crime, currently managing Zoom. And thank you, Sandra, for managing Facebook Live, as well as our sponsors, YWCA of Adams County, Grand Island, ACLU Nebraska, and of course, Center for Rural Affairs. I feel like I'm broadcasting radio at this moment, but I do want to make sure we have all of those individuals just to let you know that we appreciate you. And again, shout out to Central Community College. More than 100 of you registered and came. You showed up for Dr. Clark, and we appreciate you. So here you will be with us, and hopefully you'll hear from us here soon. We will have another conversation that we do have planning is race and mental health. So just be aware that is coming, and I promise you I will talk to Chris and I will talk to Dr. Clark on a part 2. So again, thank you very much and have a wonderful day, everyone. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Bye.